Hey everybody, welcome to the program. This is the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. I am Brad Listi. I'm your host. I'm in Los Angeles. Thank you for being here. It's Friday, so I'm going to be doing a flashback episode where I dig into the Otherppl archives and share an outtake from an episode out of the past. Today, an outtake from episode 732, my conversation with author Alexandra Kleeman. It first aired on October 13th, 2021. Alexandra Kleeman is the author of the acclaimed novel Something New Under the Sun. Her other books include a short story collection called Intimations and the debut novel You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine. You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine was awarded the 2016 Bard Fiction Prize, and it was a New York Times editor's choice. Alexandra Kleeman's fiction has been published in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Conjunctions, and Guernica. She is an assistant professor at the New School. A flashback to episode 732 is coming up momentarily. Don't forget to sign up for my weekly email newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you want to join the Otherppl Patreon community, I would appreciate that. If you're a regular listener, check it out over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. All right, so once again, today is Friday. It's time for a flashback, and I'm going to be sharing an outtake from episode 732, my conversation with Alexandra Kleeman. It first aired on October 13th, 2021. A reminder that the full episode is available in the feed. So if you like this flashback and you want to hear more, check out episode 732, wherever you get your podcasts. All right? All right, here we go with today's flashback. This is me talking with Alexandra Kleeman back in 2021.
My Asian half of the family lives in the San Gabriel Valley, which is a good hour, I feel, from any place else in LA. We used to drive an hour to 2 hours to visit, other family members in Long Beach or in Redondo Beach and places like that. And it always seemed like this interminable amount of time spent in the car looking out at the other cars crawling along with me. And I'm channeling a lot of that, like the sort of fascination of this place that in a lot of ways resembles whatever you want it to be if you put enough time and energy and water into it. But then as soon as you stop tending it, like this line behind our subdivision, it's bramble and coyotes and a very dry, combustible sort of hill environment. So I always had questions about that when I was growing up, like why is everyone working so hard to make this place look like every place else? And I knew that when I wrote my second novel, which I wanted to have like partake of place in a really different way from my first sort of surreal any place novel, that I wanted it to be in the West. In terms of Hollywood, I've had a little bit of experience adapting my novel for a screenplay or appearing as myself in a film that my first editor's brother made about their life. So he wanted to populate it with people who actually had roles in his family's life, and I was there for one day on set, a very long day that started at like 5 a.m. and went until 5 or 6 p.m. and involved so much waiting around. And I think that time spent on set was really interesting and really elastic to me because it seemed like you could be in this timeless zone, just standing around, waiting to be called. And then suddenly when cameras were rolling, you were there in the real time, and every second was solid and substantial and could be put right up on screen, But the aimlessness of the time around those little bits of film time were fascinating to me too. And you kind of dwell in that time when you live on set in this sort of purgatorial space.
Yeah, I've often thought about that with respect to acting, because I've not spent like a long day on set like that, but I know, living here and being among movie people, you sort of hear about how much downtime there is, or reading any kind of Hollywood profile. It's always like, the lamenting of the downtime. And then you couple that with somebody giving like a really difficult performance on screen. Like if the subject matter especially is really grueling, or it's like Charlize Theron in Monster, like something like that.
Yes.
And it's like, oh my God, like she was at craft services or like holed up in her trailer, like meditating for 4 hours, and then finally gets called out and has to do like 10 takes of really, layered and combustible and difficult, like emotional acting. I guess I'm impressed anyway when somebody's able to do that effectively on camera, but I think I'm maybe doubly impressed when they've done it while coming out of that kind of like boredom and, like, what's the word for it? That sort of, middle ground, or that like liminal space or whatever, where you just kind of sort of exist in wait while they fix the lighting.
Yeah. You're drifting around, you're unanchored, and then suddenly you're expected to snap back into this fictive situation, and channel all that energy. Like, I think it's fascinating, and I really admire actors for being able to do that. And at the same time, I think that if I were to try to do that in a serious way, it would result in me becoming completely unmoored, from who I am, and not sure how to deal with my energy flow, not sure which world I was living in, both in terms of acting and in terms of developing things for TV. I've been fascinated by the way that people think in Hollywood in these extremely plastic, adaptive, quick thinking, and malleable terms. Like with any story that you start talking about with a TV writer, one of my closest friends is a TV writer, they're able to ask the question like, can we beat this plot point? Can we beat this language? And that both, seems exhilarating, like a way of digging beneath what you can first think of or know about a story to some really surprising stuff, but also, again, unsettling that nothing necessarily has to be a particular way in a screenplay. It can always be changed and bettered or shifted.
Yeah, no, so you've written a little bit, like it sounds like you've done some adaptation of your own work and then have maybe written like a pilot or something.
Yeah, my friend and I were working for a while on a TV adaptation of the Todd Haynes movie Safe, which is one of my longtime favorites. In fact, I feel like my imagination was really heavily shaped by seeing some scenes from that movie when I was a little too young. The like clean valley sort of spaces with endless carpeting, and then the dangers therein. And whether we were sort of like taking this movie, which has a very particular tone and a very Todd Haynes aesthetic, and then trying to think like, how can we shift the pacing? How can we shift the level of drama? And how can we toggle some of these other genre things that are there on a sort of low-key setting and turn up the horror, or turn down the horror from how you normally expect it to appear in a movie or TV show.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of writing for TV, and what I was struck by is like just how much I was expected to get on the page in terms of like stuff happening and drama. And I guess it, for somebody with like a literary background, and especially like a literary background within the subset of literature, where there's a little bit or a lot more latitude in terms of action, and an entire novel can be sustained inside of a person's head, but with the expectations of television executives and then also like a television audience, there's a lot that has to get accomplished. And I think my sensibility resisted it. I was like, wow, that's too much, like these explosions on page one and, or whatever it is, just some big, huge thing seems to have to happen every 5 seconds. And
Totally.
I resisted it, but yet I guess I understood it, and on a certain level. And I say that, and then I think of your protagonist, who is the author of a novel called Elsinore Lane, and he's out in Hollywood because they're adapting his novel for the screen, or at least he thinks that they are. And his name is Patrick, and what is he? He's kind of somewhat anti-heroic, or what's the right way to encapsulate him? I don't know. He feels very familiar to me. And they make him a PA on the set, which I thought was hilarious. I mean, you did intend that as a joke, right? The way that writers writers in general are, historically mistreated in the Hollywood machine. But I think maybe especially the writers of books whose work is being adapted, like there's even more distance and like permissiveness when it comes to abuse. So I guess I'm curious to know why you did that, and if that was born of like any personal bad experiences you've had working in Hollywood.
Not personal bad experiences, but one thing I think I've noticed about writers is writers, however much they love and maybe are addicted to writing, also I think have this curiosity in them about like what would happen if I threw this all away and started at the bottom of something else. Like I know friends who are writers who've taken entry-level jobs as cooks in restaurants to see what that's like on the off chance that something there and that experience might spark a story or a novel or a memoir. I know that my husband and I, he's also a writer, and we love movies, like sometimes different movies. We have a big overlapping zone where we're passionate about the same sort of films. But we talk a lot about how we've got this unfailing sort of optimism for Hollywood and the film industry. Like we believe in it still as a place where our fortunes could change and everything could be turned around. And I feel like no one holds that same sense about their own industry, about the literary industry or publishing. It still is sort of a dreamland, even as I know that it is a very real place, ballasted out by all of these both like dramatic reversals and completely mundane things that must be just as crushing when you're working under them.
I feel like living away from it in like, you're in Staten Island. I know New York is like a media capital and they make movies and television there too, but I've become cynical. I was just texting with a friend about this like over the past few days, how like I will make monolithic judgments, which is a human thing to do. Like you make these monolithic judgments like in conversation or in some sort of emotional fit that when you actually have some distance from them, you realize say more about you than they do about the thing that you're placing judgment on. And if there's a thing that I do that most often with, including on this program, it's probably about like Hollywood and Hollywood people. And I think maybe I would do a lot less of that if I didn't live here. I don't know. Like maybe some of the some of the romance of it, which I certainly have some of. That's why I was a film major in undergrad at Boulder, incidentally, which I remember we talked about last time. But I don't know. It just feels like maybe I would do better if I had some more geographical distance. And maybe you feel something similar about publishing since you have proximity to it in New York.
Yes, I mean, I was totally thinking this as you were saying what you were saying about being cynical about the film industry. Like, I think that our optimism, our sense of unbounded possibility, it's displaced to the other coast, Like California seems like a place to me where big narrative reversals can happen in your life. And the East Coast feels like a place that has sort of been tapped out. But from the West Coast, I think people feel the same way about the East Coast. And that's why we have this constant movement back and forth between the coasts.
Right.
It's this mirrored desire or something.
Well, we have a neighbor who's lived here for like 30 years or 35 years, and she worked at my son's school, and she just announced that like she and her family are leaving LA after all this time and moving to upstate New York. And I feel like, you could easily have that story happening in reverse any number of times, per week. But yeah, there's some sort of like feeder system going on. And I think in the end, it doesn't really matter all that much where you are. Like, it's mostly between our ears, right? It's a psychological issue, not a geographical issue.
Yes. But sometimes it's a lot easier to change your physical location than to change what's between your ears.
Yes, it's so much more convenient. If I could just move to upstate New York and fix everything, it would be delightful. So I'm hoping you can put something to rest for me, because I wanted to have like some sort of cool decoder moment where I explain to you why you chose the title Elsinore Lane. I think it has something to do with Hamlet. Is it a Hamlet reference?
Yeah, it's a Hamlet reference. And I think, it's one of the pieces of this book that I installed when I was starting out. And I was like, this book can have anything in it. Like, it has to be bigger and more expansive and feel also like it's joining some disjointed elements. So why didn't I just scoop some Hamlet in there? Because literally seeing Hamlet was the last thing I did in the regular world. I saw Ruth Negga playing Hamlet in a performance in Brooklyn. So, it's a constant part of my life, but I also felt it was really relevant to this situation because it's a play that problematizes the whole question of how is information linked to action? Like, does knowing more and uncovering the truth change the way you act effectively on the problem? So that Hamlet has this intuition about his uncle's culpability right at the beginning, but he's never actually able to direct that intuition into like a decisive action against his uncle. He hurts like everyone else on the sidelines, but knowing more doesn't really help him to do what needs to be done. So I think that's kind of, a metaphor in some way adjacent to climate change. Like, we know so much and we know ever more, and we understand better how our dire predictions match up to like an increasingly dire reality. But still the problem of action is the same problem we've been posing to ourselves since the beginning of the whole thing. Maybe that sounds bleak.
Well, no, I mean, and I want to talk more about this because this is an area of fascination for me as well. But before we do, I want to explain a little bit, or maybe have you explain a little bit to readers or to listeners who might not have had the chance to read yet, like the territory that you're covering in your novel. So we've touched on it a little bit. You have an author named Patrick who has come west to Los Angeles in like a near future because they're adapting his novel. Mm-hmm. And the kind of backdrop to your story, if I may, is like a, rapidly advancing climate change. Kind of like the circumstances are like much of what we're experiencing now, the fires and the weird weather and the ominous news, but maybe a little bit more intensified. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. Although I was doing my final edits in Colorado last summer, the summer before this past one, and one question that I pose to myself sometimes is, what would I have done differently with this book if I were to rewrite it now? And I definitely would have made the East Coast a flooding zone,
right?
In a way that I hadn't imagined at the time. Yeah,
it's so weird how it's like yin and yang. Like the West is completely dried out and on fire, and the East is flooded and constantly barraged with these like storms. So we need to build like a national aqueduct or something and just like send some water west.
Totally.
But okay, so we've got the advancing apocalypse of climate change. We've got a Hollywood story where an author is out working as a PA on the set of the adaptation of his book. We have the story of Cassidy, who is kind of like the archetype, the starlet like archetype, and a really cool character that subverts expectations. And I don't know. There's just there's a lot of dimensionality to her that I appreciated and some of which surprised me. Like she goes in some unexpected directions. But can you talk a little bit about her and the creation of her and I guess, yeah, just her origin story as a character and how you came to write her?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Cassidy Carter is someone who is probably modeled like on the surface level most after people like Lindsay Lohan or Britney Spears who are having their public breakdowns. And you can't see it, but I'm doing breakdowns and scare quotes, finger quotes, because it's a breakdown if someone is breaking you down, you know. It makes it sound like a sort of character flaw that they were experiencing on their own, but really like the pressure of having your image extracted from you at all hours of the day, the pressure of performing 100% of the time and of being judged for everything that you do, I think is a pressure that most of us maybe have had a slight taste of, but cannot imagine at that scale or at that like level of relentlessness. So I was interested in the one hand in exploring the inner life of someone who had experienced that and how it would shape their attitude toward things like their own authenticity, their own goals, their career, their idea of success. But I was also just interested in this fundamental confusion, I think, that comes of trying to switch between different modes that are, you know, expected of you or asked of you by the world.
Okay, everybody, there we have it. Today's flashback. An outtake from episode 732, my conversation with author Alexandra Kleeman. It first aired on October 13th, 2021. Alexandra Kleeman's latest novel is called Something New Under the Sun. Go get your copy. For more on Alexandra Kleeman, visit alexandrakleeman.com. Follow her on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe to the Otherppl show wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow the show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. If you want to get my weekly email newsletter, sign up over at bradlisti.substack.com. and join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. If you would like to sign up for the Otherppl Book Club or get an Otherppl t-shirt, you can do that at the show's official website, otherppl.com. If you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out a little bit, give this show a rating wherever you listen. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, whatever it is, please rate the Otherppl podcast and write a little review if that's an option. It helps the show find new listeners. Okay, so coming up on Sunday, I will be in conversation with Helen Tworkov, founder of Tricycle, the Buddhist magazine, and author of a debut memoir called Lotus Girl, available from St. Martin's Essentials. I had a wonderful talk with Helen Tworkov, very fascinating. It's coming up on Sunday. Stay tuned.